is our most important program. Lord Chaitanya's movement means the Sankirtan movement. You may simply take 2 hours for chanting 16 rounds daily, 2 hours for reading congregationally, and balance time, go out for Sankirtan. That means 1 hour morning, 1 hour evening. We must do both, reading books and distributing books. But distributing books is the main propaganda. Reading in class for 2 hours is sufficient. Another reading can be done in spare time if one has got it. It is not that one has to be always reading. 1 hour a morning for Bhagavad class and 1 hour evening either Bhagavad Gita or Nectar of Devotion. That is sufficient. January 1972. You should always think of new outlets for distributing my books, Srila Prabhupada wrote to Jagadish. And new outlets the devotees found, shopping centers, malls, parking lots. They were meeting more people than ever before. By entering the malls and shopping centers, the devotees plunged into the heart of American society, meeting pious and impious, rich and poor, black and white. Book selling was still difficult, but the devotees persevered, carrying their heavy book bags and distributing the literature they knew could solve all problems. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Yeah.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st canto, 15th chapter, text 14. Yes, text 14. Everyone has it? You have it?
Yesterday you did 12.
Yeah, it's 13.
Yes, they did 12.
Yeah, 13, yeah.
They did 12, and we're on 13. So we stand corrected. Thank you, Mother Nimala. That's Tatraiva me viharato ujadanda yugmam gandiva lakshanam ati avadhaya deva sendra srita yadunabhavitam ajamida tenaham adya mushita purushena bhumna tatraiva me viharato bhujadanda yugmam gandiva lakshanam arati vidhaya deva Chandra Shritaya Danubhavita Majamida Tena Hamadya Mushita Viharata Bhujadanda Yugmam Gandhi Valakshana Marati Vidaya Deva Chandra Shritaya Danubhavita Majamida Tena Madhyamushita Purushena Bhumna Tatraiva me viharato bhujadanda yugmam Gandiva lakshanam arati vidhaya deva Chandra Shritaya Danubhavitam Ajamidha Tena Hamadhyamushita Purushena Bhumna Madhyamushita Purushena Bhumna Tatraiva me viharato bhujadanda yugmam
Gandiva Lakshanam Arati Vidhaya Deva.
Chandra Shitaya Nubhavitamachamida.
Tena Hamadya Mushita Purumshena Bhumna. Tatra.
In that heavenly planet.
That heavenly planet.
Eva. Certainly.
Me.
Or me.
Myself.
Viharata. While staying as a guest. Bhujadanda
Yugmam.
Both of my arms. Gandiva. The bow named Gandiva. Lakshanam.
Mark.
Arti. A demon named Nivat Kavacha. Madaya. For killing. Deva. All the demigods. Sa. Along with. Indra. The heavenly king Indra. Srita. Taken shelter of. Yat. By whose? Anubhavitam. Made it possible to be powerful. Ajamida. O descendant of King Ajamida. Tena. By him. Aham. Myself. Adya. At the present moment. Mushita. Bereft of. Purushena. The personality. Bhumna. Supreme. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. When I stayed for some days as a guest in the heavenly planets, all the heavenly demigods, including King Indradev, took shelter of my arms, which were marked with the Gandiva bow, to kill the demon named Nivatakavacha. O King, descendant of Ajamida, at the present moment I am bereft of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by whose influence I was so powerful. Purport. The heavenly demigods are certainly more intelligent, powerful, and beautiful, and yet they had to take help from Arjuna because of his Gandiva bow, which was empowered by the grace of Lord Sri Krishna. The Lord is all-powerful, and by his grace, his pure devotee can be as powerful as he may desire, and there is no limit to it. And when the Lord withdraws his power from anyone, he is powerless by the will of the Lord. Om Jnana Pramanandasya Mukam Karoti Vachalam A very nice, short, simple, to the point purport. It seems obvious at times, but we have a tendency to forget that whatever we have, our life, our breath, our consciousness, everything is fully dependent on the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, seated as a super soul within this yantra, this machine made of material elements. But at the time of death, or just approaching the time of death, everyone recognizes that I'm about to leave. He doesn't think, in one sense, that I'm going to die. He recognizes that faint glimmer of hope that is promised by all so-called religion, that there is an afterlife, that there is a heaven, even there's a hell. He's still thinking, I will continue, but it may not be under the best of circumstances. And for us, we see that in our efforts to spread the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, that we can measure our success by our attention to the instructions of the spiritual master of Krishna. And in the absence of those, just like in the absence of Lord Shri Krishna, although Arjuna still possessed the Gandiva bow, without the power of the Supreme Lord, that bow was just a piece of wood and cinder. You know, they didn't use string, interestingly enough. You know, string breaks. So they had very special attention to these bows. Can you imagine a bow that can fire thousands of arrows? Thousands. You know, in material experience, we understand that there are what are called machine guns, which are fed by a continuous belt of ammunition. But in the Vedic times, no such gross weapon existed. But yet Arjuna could shoot thousands of arrows. How is it possible that we have no reference to understand that? But for such a personality, it was possible. And he could take, and by mantra, by surcharging these weapons spiritually, they could perform any function that the mantra empowered them to, whether that was as a Brahmastra, the ultimate weapon, or any other weapon, even to counteract the Brahmastra. All such facility existed, as long as he was empowered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Well, these bodies now are growing old and dwindling, and one recognizes that he doesn't have the same power he had as a young person. So that is also some indication that in our youth we become proud that everything is functioning properly. But as time, which is the great destroyer, even Oppenheimer, one of the fathers of the atomic age, at the time of the detonation, he had two quotes from the Bhagavad Gita. Do you know what those are? One was, "Time I am, destroyer of all the worlds." And the other one was, "Like 10,000 suns arising simultaneously." So obviously he was somewhat of a student of Bhagavad Gita. You'd be surprised how many personalities have been influenced. I mean, we know from the Bhagavad Gita itself, the Prabhu's, that Gandhi was very much influenced by Bhagavad Gita. And the American transcendentalists, Thoreau, Emerson, like that, they all were influenced by the Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita is not different from the Lord. It can empower one, but not in the sense of as Arjuna possessed for a specific pastime. But this is a different pastime. This is Lord Chaitanya's Leela. So his empowerment, what's that verse? Yagnaya Sakirtana Praya Yajantihi Sumedasa. That the weapons, Astra, we know that. Trying to think of the beginning of the verse. But the weapons of the Sankirtan movement are the chanting of the holy names. So this is, and as long as we have that as our life's mission to propagate Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement, following the footsteps of our spiritual masters, that we become and remain empowered. But at any time, this empowerment may be withdrawn if one does not adhere strictly to his vows. We see that we know that in Vedic culture there are the samskars. There's the 10 primary. Even before birth, there's the Garbhadhan samskar. And all these samskars simply meant to build on a foundation of spiritual strength by allowing the living entity to construct this fortress of spiritual life to protect one from the devastating attacks of the material, adhyatmic, adhibautic, and adhidaivic. So if one takes shelter within this system, of course we understand that there's a difference between the social order, varnashram, and the Daivi varnashram, which is our Krishna consciousness movement, devoid of any mundane social considerations that sometimes we become caught up in thinking that we have to adhere to some cultural restrictions. That, if there was cultural restrictions previously, one could not cross the ocean. One could not leave India. It was forbidden. Otherwise, one would lose his caste, his social, spiritual designations. So there was many ways and many attempts to try to circumvent this. The king of Jaipur, when he went to London to take audience, that was the first time any king of India had gone outside. So he had these huge silver vats constructed. You can see them if you go to Jaipur, you go to the city museum, at the gates. He had many, they look like a lota. So it's shaped narrow at the top and then a big, these are all pure silver. Can't imagine how much silver it is. 1 ton of silver. And he had many of these. And what did he do with these? So when he had to go overseas, he had them filled with Ganges water and loaded onto the ship. So that he was only eating, drinking, and bathing in Ganges water. And so this way he tried to circumvent the restriction about not traveling abroad, because this way he brought Ganges with him. India came with him. So, for us, there's no such consideration. And Srila Prabhupada is our perfect example. How he was able to do these things. How he was able to bring Krishna consciousness and to empower those who were otherwise the lowest of mankind. There's not even a classification. For those outside of India, they're called Malecha is the common term. Yavana, Malecha. This is totally outside the social order. Sudra is in the Varnashram. But outside of the Varnashram is those who have no status. But he came, and taking the understanding of the Shastra as demonstrated by Lord Chaitanya and realized souls, that just as bell metal can be converted into gold by the application of alchemical process, so any jiva, regardless of his condition, can be elevated to the status of Vaishnava. But Prabhupada was roundly condemned for doing this. What to speak of giving initiation? Then he dared to give initiation to women and to give Brahmin initiation. It was unheard of. Unheard of. So we see that one has to have the guidance of such a soul, such a great soul, such a Mahatma, in order to clearly understand what is the essence of spiritual life. We're not meant to argue about some cultural consideration. These things are all, in many respects, condemned by our understanding of the Shastra. Vidya vinaya sampanye. So one sees with equal vision. So if one sees with equal vision, then how can he make some distinction on the transcendental platform? He cannot. He can only make it if he applies it using some cultural consideration. That we have to have some faith that as we saw the success of Srila Prabhupada, that if we simply take that and use it to preach, not for some trying to circumvent some social thing. It's not a supplementation, but rather it is an addition, an enhancement. But there will be enough discussion of a situation like this. And regardless of all these considerations, without the presence of the Lord, without Krishna's grace, no one can act. No one can act. And now, as it progresses, Arjuna's lamentation is very difficult to hear. And for us, we feel conflicted somewhat because we know that in the remembrance of the Lord, His presence is there. But somehow or other, Arjuna is demonstrating or displaying some disconnect. That, similar to his confusion on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, that he was so concerned about social convention, so concerned about, the morality of the situation. And Krishna had to literally pause the battle while he straightened his friend, come disciple, and put him back in the right mindset in order to proceed and achieve victory. So we have a similar consideration that we may be afflicted by some doubt, but this doubt is simply due to forgetfulness of Krishna. I am seated in the heart of every living entity, and from me comes knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. So if we want to forget Krishna, if we want to stop being an instrument for Krishna, for the Supreme Lord, then it's simply easily done by one moment's calculation. He just chooses, and it's amazing to see, like a switch. Somebody flips. Brahmananda Maharaj, he coined the term, or he at least informed Srila Prabhupada of the term bloop. Bloop entered the Krishna conscious lexicon, in the early days. And it was paraphrased, somehow or other, I forget the term, whether it's alliteration but it's the sound that a drop of water makes when it merges back into the totality of the body of water. Just think, bloop. You go back into the material pool, basically. So that sound, Prabhupada said, and Prabhupada acknowledged, yes, it is like that. It doesn't take much. And then to extract oneself again, it's a little difficult. But Krishna can make it very easy. All one has to do is, again, turn his face toward the Lord. Just has to turn his face to the Lord. Just has to acknowledge that this is my dearmost friend, and for whatever reason, I've forgotten him. Just like the prodigal son. In so many literature, there's a similar story about the son who leaves home, goes away, forgets about the family, but the family never forgets about him. And when he comes back, he's immediately welcomed with open arms. So this, Krishna is always waiting for us. Now, some days it may appear to be more difficult. But why did Srila Prabhupada give us these vows, like we spoke of, like this samskar? This chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra is a gift. It is the greatest gift. You cannot purchase it for any amount of money in the world. And people do not realize how valuable it is until they recognize how this great chant for deliverance. If someone is drowning and you give him the means for deliverance, there is nothing more valuable at that time. It may be an insignificant life preserver or a life jacket, and in and of itself is worthless in the scheme of things. There are thousands of them on the boat, and they may never be used, and there's no value. But when the ship is sinking and everyone needs one, then they're priceless, just like the lifeboat. So many stories are there about people having to sneak onto the lifeboat because it's always women and children first. So at the time and Prabhupada talks about the Titanic in one lecture in Mayapur. At the time of the sinking of the Titanic, so many big men. But the gentlemen allowed the women and children to go first. Even though they had paid first class fare. They have different lifeboats for different categories. But they gladly gave up their seats. Because that is symbolism. They understand. But then there were those that dressed like women in order to get on the lifeboat. They pretended to be women. And therefore they took the seat of a woman. Put themselves in their place. So in any case, that lifeboat or that life preserver is so valuable. And when it's needed, if one has not practiced his whole life, he will not be able to utilize it. He will not know how. There's a Prabhupada said that is why we chant Hare Krishna. 16 rounds a day minimum. Because at the time of death, how many times have we had a situation where we encounter some obstacle? We fall down, we hurt ourselves. But the first thing out of our mouth is not Krishna, it's something else. But that test is there. This is the practice. One has to always be thinking of Krishna at that moment, because that may be his only chance to grasp that life preserver. He may not get another. He may see death coming in whatever form. Could be the bus. George Harrison explains that when he was on an airplane one time, He had never experienced anything like it. The plane was experiencing dramatic turbulence, just going up and down. Things were floating in the air. People were being thrown all around the cabin. Whatever was loose was. And everybody was screaming and yelling. He just started chanting, Krishna, 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 at the top of his lungs. At the top of his lungs. And in his mind, and not in just his mind, but many people's minds, he said, Krishna saved them. Krishna saved them. So this has to be, nothing else can save you at the time of death. And it's not that you'll come back to life necessarily. But tyaktva deham puna janma nayati mamiti sarja. Whatever you have understood, whatever you have realized, at that point, yam yam bhapi smaram bhavam tijatyante kaleva. Whatever you can remember, and if it's Krishna's name, then our life is perfect. It's an interesting phenomenon. No one can chant the mantra for you at the time of death. There may be so many people, yes, and we see that, oh yes, the devotee is in a coma, everybody goes and they chant. Is that living entity hearing? What is where is he? Sometimes they're not even there anymore. That coma, that means the subtle body is already gone, wherever it's gone. Doesn't have to stay there. Just because the body's there doesn't mean that the soul is there. I mean, it means that there's a thin connection. It's still breathing. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes they're keeping it breathing by artificial means. So then it's really debatable. Is the jiva there or not? But in any case, so we have to be very conscious. What is our position? And whether or not at the time of death we will have that facility. There's no guarantee unless one has practiced throughout his life. There's no guarantee. It is not like going to college for 4 years and getting a piece of paper. It says I have a BA, MA, PhD. It doesn't. That will not save you at the time of death. Whether one has fully taken to heart the process, because that sincerity will cause Krishna to appear within your mind at the time of death. That's the key. Krishna will appear somehow or other. And it may be that at that moment when everyone's chanting around your deathbed, that you hear that holy name and you finally, you get that proper sender. If one is fortunate. It's not that, someone who's never practiced their whole life, we have some sentiment, my family member, this, that, the other thing, that our chanting is going to deliver it. That doesn't work like that. You can give some assist, some Ganges water, some Tulsi leaf, some Kunti Mala. We do all those things. That's our duty. That's our obligation. But it doesn't mean they're going back to Godhead. It means that they may take birth again in a devotee family, of course, especially if you're a devotee, and that's another obligation. That you have to save your family. There's a lecture Prabhu gives in Mayapur. You have to save your family. And that means that it's up to us who have understood, therefore become responsible. Someone who's irresponsible, he doesn't take the responsibility. He says, no, that's okay. He sees what can be done, but he doesn't want to do it. Some people have that realization that, I should take Krishna consciousness seriously. I should serve the Lord. I should follow his instructions in the Bhagavad Gita to abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto him. I should do that. But for whatever reason, I choose not to. And that lack of surrender, means he's not empowered. He may have some sentiment, but that sentiment will not save him at the time of death. It cannot. There's nothing there. Sometimes people use that term, hollow sentiment. You know, it's not just a show. It's just a show. The term bhava, we aspire for that. We don't have any right to it. It is something which Krishna can give through the agency of the spiritual master. That one develops this spiritual emotion. We don't talk about that, but this ability to have feelings for Krishna. This is not an ordinary thing. People were saying, how do you establish a relationship with God? You can't see him, you can't know him. We can. That's the point. They have no access to that secret. Raja Vidya, Raja Guyam, Pavitra Mitamutamam. This knowledge is the king of education. The most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge. And because it gives direct perception by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting and joyfully performed. So that is our fortune. That we can directly perceive Krishna's presence. Then we're not standing here in front of the deities and forcing ourselves to think, oh yes, this is Krishna. No, we have that opportunity to reciprocate, to understand how Krishna, out of great mercy, has appeared as Sri Vigraha. In the age of Kali, the Lord incarnates in his holy name and his deity form. These are the two things. So there is no one more fortunate than that person who has taken birth in Kali Yuga and taken up the process of Krishna consciousness. This is the shortest of shortcuts. Special dispensation. We only live 100 years, not 1,000 years, not 10,000 years, not 100,000 years, like Satyuga. 100 years. Special dispensation. So an intelligent person will take it up. Because you think, when will we get another chance? When will we get another chance? But one has to directly perceive it on his own. And that comes from adopting these favorable samskaras and practicing, regularly practicing. That's what it says, regularly hearing. So, and Prabhupada we read in the Lilamrita, that section we just read, a little passage, that someone was trying to introduce that the devotees should read for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day. Some traveling segments. And it was reported back to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, what is this? It says, the system is in place. 1 hour morning class, 1 hour evening class, and then any extra time that a person has, if any. But otherwise, on the streets all day, street sankirtan. So this is the most important activity. Chanting the holy name and distributing the books. Most important. We don't neglect anything. But at the same time, we have to know what is the priority, what is the emphasis, what is the desire, and how to come to that platform. If I don't have a feeling of sentiment to the spiritual master and his instruction, how will I have a feeling of sentiment for Krishna? How is that possible? So there's no such thing as a person who has some show bottle attachment and affection for the deity. We see they come, they cry, they roll on the floor, so many things. But they have no ability or taste or desire or commitment to follow the instruction of the spiritual master, who is the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As the Lord says, Tadvidi pranipatena pariprasnena sevya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tapadarshana. Just try to learn the truth by approaching the spiritual master. Inquire submissively and render service unto him. They can impart knowledge unto you, those great souls can impart knowledge unto you, because they have seen the truth. So we have not seen the truth, not with these eyes. But we can see the truth through the eyes of the Shastra. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya. Why do we say this prayer? What is the meaning? Opens my darkened eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. So we want to be instruments in the hands of the spiritual master and Krishna. We don't want to be the Gandiva bow, now just a useless decoration without any power. The same situation, devotees, you can learn so many things in devotional life. People think that you come here, you become a mushroom, kept in the dark. But we see that devotees become so qualified, sometimes so qualified, that they think, let me use this qualification to make money on the outside. They become expert cooks, they become expert salespersons. They become expert in so many things. But if your expertise is not used for Krishna, then it is shrama eva hi kevalam. Simply a useless waste of time. What's that verse? Atak pumbir dvija sheshta vana shama vibhagasha swanustatasya dharmasya samsiddhir haritoshanam. Samsiddhir. Whatever, regardless of one's occupation, according to caste, divisions, and orders of life. If one does not please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then his life is wasted. His life is wasted. But people think, no, I can do something. And that's not, yes, you could work like a hog or a dog. Very difficult. Prabhupada used to use the example of the horse. And in India, they used to have this means of transportation, not so much anymore, called tanga. Tanga is a two-wheeled carriage pulled by a horse. So it's like a horse rickshaw for longer distances. Anything more than a couple of kilometers. In the old days, they're human rickshaw drivers that cannot go. They're all short hop. So there's these horses, they'll go for 10, 12 kilometers, 5 kilometers. Pile as many people on as they can, each one is giving some money. And the person is ruthlessly beating this horse. And the hot Indian summer sun, it's incredibly hot. Unless you've experienced it, it's beyond the imagination. And the horse, working so hard, foam comes in the mouth. Foam comes in the mouth. So those living entities who are simply working hard like this, it is compared to this, that they're simply foaming at the mouth for some material endeavor, which is destined to be taken away, whatever they've accumulated at the time of death. So anyway, I feel sorry for Arjuna at this point. He's a pure devotee of the Supreme Lord, it's just Leela. We know that it's for our benefit that he's demonstrating these things, just to remind us that if one loses sight of Krishna, if he thinks that Krishna is gone, that his instructions are no longer there, that I cannot take shelter of him, then whatever I am, whatever I was, yes, it is gone at that point. It is gone. But therefore, the Prabhupada encapsulates that. So always remember Krishna and never forget it. The most important rule. Always remember Krishna and never forget it. Everything else is for that. Serving Krishna, chanting Krishna's holy name, taking Krishna prasadam, distributing knowledge about Krishna. It is all just to remember Krishna. And the opposite side is if one forgets Krishna, then it becomes like Arjuna at this point in time. Any questions, comments? For text 13. Thank you.
You mentioned that a person, if he doesn't use his talent in the service of Krishna, Krishna takes it away. Is that right?
Well, he doesn't take it away. It's there in a latent way.
But how is it, how to properly do it? Like, for example, a person has a very good talent to heal people, and he heals people, like brings them from the basically a state where their lying cannot move to to a normal state. Should he, with that, preach to them and tell them to pick up Krishna consciousness process, or is that kind of imposing upon the right free will of the person?
That's that verse. Whatever your situation is, if you're not pleased with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then whatever you're doing, so-called healer, is a useless waste of time. It does not satisfy the Lord.
But saying he does it for money, like he does it as occupation.
However he does it, that word occupation is in that verse. Would you like to read that verse? Let's read that verse. I don't know what's quicker nowadays. What's quicker? So this is 1-2-13. This chapter is titled Divinity and Divine Service. Atak Pumbir Dvija Shrestha Varna Shama Vibhagashaha Sunustatasya Dharmasya Samsiddhya Haridosha. O best among the twice born, it is therefore concluded that the highest perfection one can achieve by discharging the duties prescribed for one's own occupation, according to caste divisions and orders of life, is to please the personality of God. So even if he's a so-called doctor, he's doing it for money. Why is he? What is his service? His service is to be a devotee, not to be a doctor. But as a doctor, his duty is to give 50% of his income. Otherwise, it's not service. And then he's just performing karmic activities. Whatever ritualistic function he thinks he's doing in order to absolve himself from that karma, even the chanting of the holy names, if it's not done to satisfy the Lord, simply done out of some selfish desire that I should be delivered because I'm engaged in karmic activities, so we know that that's called karma. Mimamsa, so many other things. It is not pure bhakti. Karma mishra bhakti. There's some, so he'll get some benefit. Prabhupada said Krishna is kind, and Mayapur is very clear about this. He's only speaking to devotees. There's no guests in the audience. And he said Krishna is very kind. You have some material desire. Krishna can fulfill any material desire. And then he chose these next words prophetically. He said, if you want big buildings, he will give you big buildings. There was no buildings in Mayapur. It was all rice paddy, as far as the eye could see. But now when you go to Mayapur, all you see is big buildings, built by so-called devotees. And what did Prabhupada say after that? He said, but you will have to take birth again in the material world. He didn't say as a human being. And there will be a gap. No, he did say you can take birth again as a human being. But there will be a gap of millions of years, which means that you will be taking birth through the 8,400,000 species of life. So can you just imagine? If someone comes up to you and says, hey, I'll give you $1 million, but you have to take this coronavirus, and you're going to die in 7 days. But you have $1 million that you can spend within that 7 days. Will anybody accept that? I guarantee there are some people who will do that. But any intelligent person, forget $1 million, $1 billion. I'll give you $1 billion. But you have 7 days to spend it. And that's the condition. You know, maybe there's some altruistic, philanthropic devotee who'll take the $1 billion and say, okay, let me give it to Krishna, and then I'll give up my life. That's okay. But in general, you know, I probably use many such analogies like this. Know what? You cannot buy even a moment's time with all the gold in the world. You cannot buy a moment's time. Someone said, just give me one more moment. No, at the time of death, everything is decided and determined. Not one more moment. But still people foolishly think, let me chase this phantasmagoria of material wealth, and I'll achieve it. When real wealth is here before him, the most valuable thing, you know, spiritual life. Nothing more valuable than spiritual life. So don't be a doctor. Prabhupada told my godbrother, my godbrother asked him, Prabhupada, I'm already in school and this and that, the other. Said, should I complete my studies? And Prabhupada said, no. He said, there are enough doctors. There are enough doctors. You need to be a spiritual physician. He said, there are enough doctors. Any other questions? Comments? Srimad Bhagavatam ki,
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
That's 14 tomorrow.
Yes.
Coronavirus. Would you like some?